Hi again and welcome to the Talking Bass podcast. This week, Ellen is sitting down to talk bass with a pioneer of heavy metal bass playing, Mr. David Ellefson. As a founding member of Megadeth, David's incredible technique, time and tight bass tone has been a fundamental part of the band's sound since the very beginning. Doubling the intricate rhythm guitar lines of Dave Mustaine has led to David developing a bulletproof bass style that cuts through a guitar-heavy mix while adding wonderful groove and distinctive, memorable bass riffs. In this interview, David gets to talk about his musical background, including his jazz influence and reading facility developed through his early years as a tenor saxophonist and organist. He also dons his bass in order to take us through some influences and to also demonstrate some of his most famous Megadeth lines. So without further ado, let's join Ellen as she gets to sit down and talk bass with the amazing David Ellefson.
Hello and welcome to the Talking Bass podcast with me, your host, Ellen O'Reilly, and my esteemed guest, David Ellefson.
Hi, Ellen. How are you?
I'm alright, man. How are you coping in lockdown?
You know, I was thinking right as getting ready to do this that, this is just now the norm, I'm plugging my bass in, we're getting our headphones on, checking our hair, we're doing all of our stuff to get ready. And it's funny how, these things used to be telephone interviews or, hey, I'll see you in June when I'm over there at Download and we'll do the interview then, that kind of stuff. And of course, that has not been a reality this last, 12 months or so, so it's funny how these forms are. I like them. They're kind of cool. I honestly, I do half of my schedule every week is press and media, and fortunately I've got new things out, records, books, coffee, movies, things to talk about. But it's funny how this is just kind of this is just sort of the check-in. This is like the daily check-in with the world, so thanks for hitting me up. I appreciate it.
No problem, no problem. Well, actually, I mean, it's probably a bit of a relief. You're so busy. I mean, it's amazing. Your interests are so broad. It's probably a bit of a relief to just talk about bass.
It is, yeah. I know. It's funny. I was thinking that it's called talk bass rather than play bass because I play bass the rest of the hours of the day. It's funny in this little office that I have here has become my man cave. I sit this way because it kind of makes for a nice little video studio, and then I turn my chair 90 degrees that way, and I plug in and I start writing and recording, and we're actually mixing a record right now, and I'm always in the middle of writing at least one or two other ones. So it's a busy little room right here with where I get my creative yayas out.
I know, and so many creative yayas. I mean, like as you said, I mean, songwriting, producing. You're also an author. You've got like quite a few books out. 4 books at the moment, and I'm sure you're working on more because I mean I see that there's a fictional chronicle going on, the Sledge Chronicles.
Yeah. Well, this one, the Sledge Chronicles is the one that is the most recent one, and we have the next one. We call it the Chronicles because it's a series of books. We decided when we were writing it that the story was too juicy to just end it. And, because he's a musician, I thought, with every tour, there's different creepy espionage and creepy people around the world that he can engage with, for his hitman activities, and South America, Europe, Asia, so let's let the fun continue. And it's funny because I just announced the David Ellefson Bass Chronicles, which is a sort of a storyteller evening with kind of event, and we called it the Chronicles to coincide with this book, quite honestly, because this is the Sledge Chronicles, and Sledge is he's the main character of the book. When I originally had Bass Story, which I still have, but we kind of themed that one around my memoir that I wrote with our friend Joel MacGyver, called My Life with Death, and I got asked to go to Australia to do a spoken word tour, right? And I was like, what is spoken word? And I thought that was like sitting in a coffee shop like Mike was in that, So I Murdered My Girlfriend, or whatever that funny movie is that he had it. He's like doing spoken word, poetic. that's what I thought it was. I'm like, what am I going to do? Sit here and pontificate about my life with my book, So, but it turns out spoken word can be, anything from comedy to clinic or whatever. So what I did is I kind of made it a bass clinic. So I thought, look, I'll bring my bass because when I run out of things to say, the bass can chime in and, he can have a word on the matter and we'll play some songs. So I made it this sort of storyteller, play some songs. I had a backing band behind me, and that created the Bass Story platform, and we took that around the world. Went to Europe and South America and across the U.S. with that. And then I wrote a second book, kind of an update to my life with death called More Life with Death. And so we did the More Life with Death tour last year with a backing band, and began to write some songs when we were out doing that, and then that led to the Ellefson solo band. We put out a record called Sleeping Giants, which had 3 new tracks as well as a whole collection of demos of ideas that I had written and demoed up back in 1993 when Megadeth had a little break on the Countdown to Extinction tour. I connected with a friend of mine in Los Angeles named Pat Shunk. He was actually a friend of our drummer Nick Menz at that time. And Pat and I just hit it off. And I mean, bang, we cranked out like 14 songs in about 2 months. Had friends like David Glenn Isley and John Bush and people like that sing on the demos. And they'd literally just been sitting on my shelf over here, and so those demos made up basically, hence Sleeping Giants. These were these sort of what I felt, pretty giant monolithic tunes that, if I got the luxury here, I have the luxury of having a record company with distribution, so I was able to, have a platform to put these things out because. That's the other thing when you create is, okay, how do I put these things out? I write a book, now what do I do with it? I write an album, now what do I do with it? You still got to then go around and ask people for their money and their hey, can you sign me? Can you so. But then moving now into this year, the David Ellefson Bass Chronicles ties well with this new book, the Rockstar Hitman, the Sledge Chronicles. So we kind of theme the books with the storyteller evening with sort of experience that we have.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I saw that you had some dates announced for autumn this year.
Yes.
Over in the States, though. But do you plan on bringing over to Europe?
Yeah, I mean, I did. I had a really good run over in Europe. I did some over at the, what is your music school there? The BI...
Oh, there's a few. There's ICMP, BIM.
BIM, yeah, it was at the BIM. I did a couple. Yep, I did a couple at the BIM there in the UK, and then I took that over to across Europe and had a really good run with it. It was a lot of fun. Just used a new band every day, everywhere I went, which was a lot of fun. At the BIM, of course, I brought some students up in the student band, and so that was a lot of fun. But with that, that's what led to me wanting to have the Ellefson band. So I had, a consistent band behind me. And then as we started writing songs and, so it's kind of funny how, necessity is the mother of invention, right? It's like when I need to have a solid band. So bang, we form a band, we write some songs, we make a record. Whoa, hey, there you go, and then that leads to the next, kind of to the next chapter. And, like I said, forming this, I had this EMP label I formed back in 2000. I started in 2015 because I produced a little all-female group here from Scottsdale that I saw play at my son's high school called Dollskin, and produced them. And by way of me and Frank Bello from Anthrax have a record called Altitudes and Attitude. And initially through that label, through Megaforce Records, I had an imprint opportunity to start this record label. And for that very thing, like if I produce something or I, write or play on a record, I have a way to put it out, digital, as we know, is easy because there's no cost. You just upload it to the digital aggregators and there it is. It's on iTunes and Spotify and YouTube and everything. Physical is more sort of discerning because there's an expense to manufacturing CDs and certainly vinyl. then warehousing it and all the rest of that kind of stuff. So, but, certain records and a lot of the stuff I do, people like to buy in physical form and have vinyl. And sometimes, just to take it on tour, and I'm not above going out to the merch booth and standing there meeting my fans and pimping my wares. It's like having a little garage sale out in the front of the house after I play, because it's obviously at Megadeth and that size of thing. We don't do that, but it would be madness and pandemonium. But, when I'm doing these smaller things on my own, it's that people want that relational thing. They don't get that when they see me with Megadeth. So when I go off on my own and I do these things and I play smaller venues, I consider that to be kind of part of the package. To be relational with the fans. I think that's a big part of the experience these days. Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I think you're definitely one of the most friendliest of rock stars I've ever met, because you're just so down to earth and open. I remember having a few cups of tea with you at different times, and yeah, brilliant.
Yeah. Well, you can thank my parents. That was being raised by a good Lutheran family on the farm in Minnesota. Like they kept me grounded, literally grounded on the farm, the dirt of the earth. They kept my hands dirty in the soil growing up. If that way of life doesn't make you want to go do something else, God bless the farmers. My older brother took over the farm, and I had a great life growing up. I mean, growing up on the farm was wonderful. I had a good family, a great neighborhood, a great town that I came from. As I know now, they were quite affluent. The farming in the 70s in the USA was, we were comfortable. I'm not going to lie, and so as I had the interest to start playing the bass, which just came out of nowhere. I always say, people say, how did you choose the bass? I say, I didn't. The bass chose me. I mean, why in the hell would this thing come down out of the sky into the cornfield of Minnesota and choose me, of all things? It's like, you, my son, are the chosen one, to play the bass, So the interest for this, excuse me, and then to go, I heard rock and roll on the radio, Styx, Sweet, Bachman Turner Overdrive, early Foreigner, Chicago, 10cc, all this stuff. And especially Sweet. I remember when Sweet, really started getting hit on the radio, like with Ballroom Blitz and Fox on the Run, those early records. And, that was a game changer. There was something just electrifying and just super awesome about it. And so, I'm a kid. I was born in 64. So I started... my mom, she had the musical talent in the house. She was, a big fan of Elvis and Motown stuff. She sang in the church choir, and, she liked rock and roll. So she liked when I got involved in music. It was cool. My dad, more of a businessman, so he sort of was very pragmatic and sort of, he was a good manager, actually, even though he wasn't technically my manager, but, he kept me rooted in reality and sort of pragmatically taking the next steps. And, so as I put bands together, and he'd kind of look at me like, what the hell are you doing over there? What is this racket and this noise you're making with your friends? And, but he would be the first to say, like, okay, you got better. Like, that sounds good. Hey, that new singer you got, or that new guitar player you just got in your band, you guys sound better now, And, as we got bigger gigs, he supported me by dedicating one of the sheds on our farm for our rehearsal hall. Putting furnaces and insulating the thing, because obviously it gets cold in Minnesota in December and January. Gave me we had a nice van from the family, so he gave me that. Helped me buy a trailer, a PA, and so I was the guy that kind of was the anchor of the group, just because I had the luxury of being on the farm. I had all the the space, and he saw me getting good at what I did and dedicated to what I was doing as a teenager, and he started to pull me back from farm work that could hurt my hands or cause any bodily injury. So and then so when I said, hey, Dad, I want to move to LA. I think it was 16. And I'm going to dye my hair, change my name, get an earring. I'm going to Hollywood. And they're like, yeah, slow down there, son. Not so fast. But he saw that I was committed to that. And, that was probably, 81. I graduated in 1983. And so for the next couple of years, he he really helped me angle toward that, and Musicians Institute, which is still out there, was a school that was getting a lot of press. We only had one magazine. It was Guitar Player Magazine. And then they spread into Bass Player Magazine and, all the rest of it. But, so Musicians Institute, it was GIT, BIT, and then eventually Vocal Institute. They offered all these programs. And that was a convincing way to tell your parents, like, I'm going to Hollywood. Hey, look, I'm going to go to school. Look at this ad in the magazine. And I actually did apply. I got accepted, and so I moved out there with my 3 friends to Hollywood and moved into our apartment there on Sycamore Avenue, just off Hollywood Boulevard. And as fate would have it, I would meet this young budding rock star guitar player named Dave Mustaine, who was about 6 weeks removed from his job in Metallica, who I did not know of at the time because they were popular on the coasts, East-West coast. They had just moved to New Jersey, or went to New Jersey to sign their record deal with Megaforce Records, and that summer were making the Kill 'Em All record, their debut album that would come out in the fall of '83. So, I met Dave. I could tell, okay, this guy is definitely a rock star. And this Metallica band that he's talking about, like, this is cool. And I knew people around Hollywood knew about Metallica. They knew Dave. We'd go to clubs and, go down to the Troubadour, the Rainbow or something. And people knew of Dave. People were attracted to him, and, as we started to play together and form a band and the word got out, then people started asking about me, like, okay, well, how's Mustaine's new bass player? Is he as good as Cliff Burton? Because Cliff, had really made a presence, with Metallica, even especially on the West Coast, because Metallica was a Southern Cal band and they just relocated to San Francisco, to get Cliff in the band. And Dave said, we're not going to debut Megadeth in Southern California. We're going to go, excuse me, up to the Bay Area to debut the band, and he was right. We went up there. We sold out these 500, 600, 700, 800 seat clubs, right out of the gate, So there was a lot of attraction to what Dave's next, venture was, and which of course would become Megadeth. So that call home to mom and dad. Hey, by the way, I'm not going to go to school. I've joined this, we started this band called Megadeth, and Megadeth was a pretty daunting name, probably the heaviest name at that time was Black Sabbath, and even that scared most people, with their crosses and, singing songs that they had. So here we are, Megadeth, taking it up another notch, and look, if it scared people and your parents didn't approve, then that was it, right? That's so. When my mom and dad were like, "What the hell's going on out there?" It was kind of like, it was one of those. Yeah, I got to go, Mom. Bye. And it's like, whew, wow, that was a weird call. But so as the time would go on and we would get our successes, my dad, especially, I think, he passed away in 1984. 1994. And so he got to see, 10 years of my life, in a real group, in a real setting, not just joining a big band as a sideman, but starting something from the scratch, which I'd always done in Minnesota growing up. Every band I was in, except for one, I always started them. And, that's just kind of how I am. I'm the founder guy, and for better or for worse sometimes. But, when they came out to California to see us, Megadeth, we performed, we started getting some Grammy nominations. The Gold and Platinum records were coming in, and they got to see us headline Long Beach Arena on New Year's Eve of '92 into '93, and that was big. That was cool. They'd seen us open with Alice Cooper and Dio and Iron Maiden, these things which they knew was big. But to see us then step out and be a headliner with Countdown to Extinction album, which was sold a couple million albums at that point, and we're all over MTV, that was kind of like, my dad then kind of went, okay, I think you're doing okay here. You might be onto something, So, it was important for me to have. He would never really approve of Megadeth music. It just, wasn't his thing. But to see his son have success was important for me. We worked very hard at it, and as we know, it's not an easy game, this thing of music, especially when you're in the business of music. Playing music is one thing, being in the business of music is a whole other deal, and if it were easy, everybody'd be doing it.
Absolutely. So did you go to any classes in MIT, or was it straight into Megadeth?
I did not, straight into Megadeth. And I grew up an educated musician. I mean, when I was before I was 10 years old, I believe my parents bought a Wurlitzer organ, which was pretty cutting edge at the time. It even had a cassette deck in it, which was the new technology, right? So I started taking lessons on that, essentially piano lessons on the organ. So, to learn treble clef on the right hand, bass clef on the left hand, and then pedals, which were bass clef. So to learn that, as just a young kid was, these are songs I did not like. I had to take lessons from a neighbor who was also a church organist, and very, she was German, I think, so very you must do it like this, and so there was no cheating, It's not like in rock and roll where you can plug your guitar into an amp and fuzz out some distortion and, sound like a rock star, But so I was definitely trained properly with that. And then I took up the tenor saxophone a little while right after that in the 5th grade orchestra band. And mostly just because the sax was the coolest looking of the instruments. That's the only reason I went for it. So again, playing orchestra music and I would play the tenor saxophone all through middle school and high school. But, I then, I heard rock and roll on the radio, on the school bus, and then I got my bass at age 11. And that was the game changer. Playing the bass for me was about being a rock star. You know what I mean? It was, I know music is a part of it, but it was it was one thing to learn music, and I'm glad I did, but, there was an escapism about playing the bass, and led largely by Kiss. And Kiss would reference the Beatles as that was their escape. I want to do that. You know what I mean? So we all have one of those. I think if you're a rock and roll fan, there's some song, there's a group, there's something. Even if you're a listener and you're not a musician, there's some song that just takes you away to. My boss sucks, work sucks, school sucks, the weather sucks. Let me put that song on that just takes me away, And so I think my then life with a bass in hand, which has been now, 45 years, has been about that process of being on stage, performing, and just feeling that sort of escape for myself, and also offering that escape for an audience to take them away to a different place, but also as a songwriter, to create music either by myself or with my friends that takes the listener off to a different place, that really removes you from the moment. To me, that's I think what great music is it takes you out of the moment. And so much of life is about trying to be in the moment, because that's where we need to be. And, the arts, whether it's a book, a music, a movie, is about getting you out of the moment, just sort of transport you out, and probably you don't even know it's happening. And I think that's the beauty of, I've been binge watching Netflix, and my favorite shows have done that to me. I'm a half hour in, and I'm just encapsulated in this story, and and I forget I'm here in Scottsdale in my house. I'm just off. I'm in the show. So music to me is the same thing. With that creating. It's funny how just hearing something, the audio, can just take you to a different place. The different soundscape that we can create with our instruments can take listeners to just a whole different dimension, and that I think is kind of the lifelong journey as a musician.
Absolutely. Well, I want to know who your early influences were on bass, because you've got a distinct sound, you've got that.
Yeah.
Who inspired
Well,
that?
it's funny, since I have my bass here, the needle drop on the Bachman Turner Overdrive record, Not Fragile, is that. then the guitars come in, na 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 na, you know, that heavy distorted guitar. So it's funny, I saw the bass. I'd see it in just pictures. I saw it in the Not Fragile album, you know, the gatefold of that. There's the band, there's a live shot of them, and Fred Turner's playing the Rickenbacker 4001. Gene Simmons, of course. You know, the bass was longer. It had 4 fat strings on it. It just had this dominating, commanding presence. And I didn't really know what its role was in the band. Of course, I'm a kid. I'm 10, 11 years old, right? And I didn't even really know what it sounded like. You know, I'd hear it, and I go, God, that is so cool. I mean, the electric guitar was a fascinating thing for me as a young boy. You know, it looked cool. There was a lot of like sparkle, you know, like sunburst, tortoiseshell pick guards. You know, there was these very flamboyant look. And again, in the 70s, I always say, you know, if rock and roll was invented in the 50s, its exploratory phase was the 60s, and by the 70s is when they kind of started to harness it, and it started to sound good. Record productions got better. They learned how to properly record, you know, guitars and bass, and you know, and also new things like the flanger and the talk box and distortion, and things got really good. You know, the quality of it got really good. So I'm happy to have grown up in the 70s, because, you know, everything from, you know, Dan Fogelberg to England Dan and John Ford Coley to Peter Frampton to Kiss to you know, things I would see on late night TV with you know, Don Kirshner's rock concerts and you know, the Midnight Special. You know, these things. Black Oak, Arkansas. I remember seeing a great performance from them, and you know, the bands that came out in Casablanca, like Kiss and Angel and Stars, and then Cheap Trick, and, you know, there was just these, you know, Aerosmith, of course, was always there as one of the American great bands that anchored, you know, American hard rock. And so all those groups were my influence, you know, and you know, bass, like I said, Gene Simmons, of course, you know, Fred Turner from BTO. And then, you know, as I'd see Steve Priest from Sweet, as bass player, co-singer, songwriter, and then Geddy Lee when I you know, I saw Rush, All the World's a Stage, and I bought a lot of albums just because of the album cover. You know, I'd see them in the music store, and I'd see like All the World's a Stage, and it's just this stage that's poised, ready for the band to come out. You know, the Marshalls, the Ampegs, the double bass, and drum kit, and the lights are on. I'm like, whoa! It's like you're just waiting for the show to happen. You know, Kiss Alive, same thing. It's like, come on. Who doesn't want to do that? I mean, like, how cool is that, you know? They look like monsters, you know, and they're just, like, killing it, you know? And so, you know, then AC/DC, If You Want Blood, you know, Cheap Trick record covers. You know, they had the 2 handsome guys in the front and the 2 kind of silly guys on the back. And first Van Halen record, I mean, just the 4 photos on the front, you're like, come on, like, you know, that's, who doesn't want to do that? And Boston, you know, here in America, especially Boston, that debut Boston record was huge. I mean, it had such a next level sound quality and production. Like, every note is perfect. Even the pick scrape became a signature, like, right? The pick scrapes were like next level, right? With delay, and they were just like, oh my God. It's like the pick scrape was like a signature sound of the band. And so, you know, again, so for me, the 70s, you know, was just such a great time to grow up. And there was other things like ELO and Supertramp, and then Foghat. And, you know, Foghat always had incredible bass playing. You know, these kind of like, you know, that Want to Make Love to You, you know, and Fool for the City and all these kind of things, you know. You know, just incredible, cool. You know, a lot of things that I liked about 70s bass playing is that it was oftentimes blues-based, definitely also riff-based kind of playing. And as we moved into the 80s, for me, you know, I got turned on to, you know, 70s, or, you know, kind of the fusion jazz rock scene became popular. You know, there was, of course, Return to Forever, Mahavishnu Orchestra. Al Di Meola solo I was a big fan of him, especially his Electric Rendezvous record. Stanley Clarke's School Days had come out, you know, that whole, you know, and he'd strum the bass with his hand, and he was just aggressive, you know. And I love these aggressive bass players. And remember when the Tubes record came out? Is it called Completion Backward Principle? I think is what it was called. Had this really great aggressive bass playing on it. Steve Lukather, I remember, wrote some of the tracks. Great guitar playing. So the 80s was kind of this next level past the 70s of really futuristic exploring on the instruments, a lot of shredding. You know, of course, Eddie Van Halen, you know, and by now was a staple of a game changer. Jaco Pastorius on the bass was a game changer for us bass players. And you know, I started playing in jazz band mostly because the bass player didn't want to do it anymore, right? So they called me to play bass in jazz band, and I could read music. So that was a good thing about learning to play, you know, the piano. Is I learned on the organ. I learned how to read, so I can still to this day read manuscript, and so that helped. So I could play in jazz band. And my band teacher said, he goes, "Listen, I know you don't really like playing the tenor sax, but you got to just keep a passable grade. So because if you can, you have to play sax in the orchestra band in order to be able to do the elective of playing in jazz band. So just practice enough to at least keep a passable grade on the sax, right?" So that was the agreement that I had. And then, you know, I'd play in jazz band. And I like playing in jazz band, not so much that I was a big fan of jazz music, because one of the things that I love about rock and roll is the repetition of the riff, you know, like... Right? I mean, we hear that riff over and over, and that's the thing about rock and roll that I loved. It was just this repetitive thing that you could grab, and it was often very simple, and it was singable, and you and me are singing it, and 5,000 other people around us, so we can grab it, right? Jazz is, in my opinion, was more of a cerebral experience, you know, and kind of, you know, going to places like, don't ever play the same thing twice. Like, why would you do that? Like, that's kind of like forbidden. You know what I mean? It's not even legal. So two different, you know, trains of thought with these styles of music. And so what I loved in jazz was being able to improvise, you know, learning jazz, and then, you know, the chord changes and soloing over changes and things. And also working with different instruments, horn sections, you know, vibraphone. You know, so an orchestra band, of course, we're working with. It's very interesting being in tenor sax because I sat dead center in the middle of the orchestra. Up ahead of me were the woodwinds, you know, everything from the clarinets to the flutes to the piccolos. And next to me, of course, was, you know, alto sax. I was tenor, baritone next to me. Behind me was the brass, you know, with trombone, baritone, and then the tuba. And then, of course, the percussion section behind me. So it was really, you know, it was great to have those experiences playing as a member, an ensemble member, and again, playing the bass and even the tenor sax. There's moments where we solo, but for the most part, we're sort of in the song as a more supportive role. And so it was, you know, it suited my personality well, you know. You know, lead guitar players tend to be a bit of show-offs, you know, and it's their personality, you know. When their moment comes, they don't pull back; they push forward. They're like, "Oh, it's my turn. Yeah, check this out," you know. You want that in a lead guitar. I want that, you know. And I want my lead guitar player to go up front and just freaking cut heads, man. I mean, that's what their role is, and that isn't just what they play. It's a personality, and sometimes. The guitar brings that out of people as well, you know. So our instruments sometimes, you know, again, if our instruments chose us, they chose us for a reason. They know what we're capable of, and they are able to dig down deep inside of our psyche and sometimes pull some personality traits out of us on the stage.
That's amazing. I mean, I wasn't expecting, I mean, like, you're so renowned for a specific genre, and when you were going on about Stanley Clarke and, like, kind of a bit more glam rock kind of influences, and being in jazz band and all that. I mean, it's kind of unexpected. But then when you were playing School Days there, I was like, oh yeah, because I can see that influence coming through in your playing, those chordal aspects.
Yeah, well, it's funny, you know, when we were on the Peace Sells tour with Megadeth in 86, 87, 86, 87, and our, you know, our guitar player Chris Poland and our drummer Gar Samuelson, they had a fusion group before they joined Megadeth called the New Yorkers, and they were a full-blown Mahavishnu, incredible fusion band, and they didn't get a deal, so they split up, and so a couple years later now they're playing in Megadeth, and it gave Megadeth this real elevated level of proficiency, far above our competitors, quite honestly, and it gave a different, it gave a uniqueness to our sound. As heavy as the music was and as pointed as the lyrics were, musically, there was a lot going on in the band that wasn't just sort of your typical kind of machine gun heavy metal, sound. And I remember we would drive around, like Chris Boland would always play a lot of Hendrix, Jeff Beck, and we had that School Days album in the RV because we hadn't gotten to a tour bus yet. We're still in an RV. And I remember driving around listening to that. And, of course, we'd have everything like Fear, punk rock band, Fear, More Beer, Sword, Metalized, which is a great heavy metal band out of Canada. So, we had everything from metal to to fusion to to punk rock in the band. And quite honestly, that was who Megadeth was at that time. There was a fusion element, there was a punk rock thing, there was a heavy metal thing, and it's funny, now talking about it, that those three genres that we listened to in the band. It's fun. It's no mistake we listened to it because it's really who we were in our sort of DNA of the band at that time.
Yeah, well, you can definitely hear other influences there. Like Peace Cells is one of like quintessential. It's funky to me, that bass line. Do 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 do.
Yeah, yeah, and it's not that little thing. I recorded it on a BC Rich Mockingbird, which sits out here as a so it's the mechanics of your body. See, it's easier to play it out there, and that's why with Jackson Guitars I invented that bass called the Kelly Bird, specifically so I could use it on the encore to play Peace Cells, because when you play it on a traditional kind of, P bass type of body, it because of where the strap hits, the strap hits at about the 12th or 13th fret, which is what balances it. It's what makes the bass balance nice on your body. But on a sort of like a Mockingbird or a Thunderbird or on my Kelly Bird, that strap button is back here. It's all the way back at like, wherever the body is about, fret, 15, 17, like fret 17. So suddenly it pushes the bass way out here. And so inadvertently, that little hammer on, it's not a hammer on because I pick it, but that little, grace note there is a lot easier to play than when it's back, back here on my. So there's sometimes things like that with the body language. I always say, when you see us on stage and we're like, look like we're striking a pose, it probably isn't so we look cool. It's mostly so we can get the guitar in a position we can play the part. Whatever that is. Dave kind of has his thing where he stands with the flying V between his legs, and he's, it's because he can get right in there and you get real tight and to play the part. So,
it
Zakk
just happens
Wylde,
to look cool.
Yeah, exactly. Zakk Wylde holds his Les Paul between his legs, which is very different for a Les Paul player, and he's kind of invented that. That's kind of see people copying that now all the time. So we stand a certain way because it's what helps us, perform. Steve Harris has his, his thing that he does, the kind of, but because he can do that because of how he, his technique of how he, sort of just touches the string. He just kind of taps on the string. He's not digging in, pulling it. He's just kind of tapping on it. And so we all have our thing. I kind of take this sort of battle stance, left leg forward, kind of like I'm a rifleman. You know what I mean? Like I'm ready to. That seems to be the position that I can get the bass comfortable. I can get my hand comfortable, anchored, because I palm mute. I get my meat of my hand kind of anchored down here over the bridge, so I can palm mute and do that that whole thing. So, it's all part of the the means to an end, if you will, of how to actually be a performer. And especially the more aggressive and the music is, it's like you're almost wrestling with your instrument. It's like again, for me, it's like a battle stance. It's like me and my bass, we're ready to come out and take on the world.
And there's me thinking it was just a cool looking thing, and there's a means.
We fooled you.
Yeah.
I remember when first time we played Castle Donington, Monsters of Rock, which is now Download. They used to serve those 2-liter bottles of beer, of ale. And the punters, they wouldn't, instead of leaving to go to the loo, they just drink the bottle, pee in the bottle, and then throw the bottle at the band, So you needed your bass in order to be fending off bottles of urine coming at you, That's where we learn these tricks.
That's it. I want to talk about your pick playing technique, because it is so perfect. I mean, not only is it like clean when you're just playing one note at a time or one string at a time, you're also throwing in extra, like, as I said before, you're throwing in extra chords. There's lots of hammer-ons and pull-offs going on as well. And at some points you have pedal notes, like in Holy Wars, there's like, you're throwing in chords and pedal points as well. I mean, it's a lot of technique going in to plectrum playing, pick playing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's I started with originally I played with fingers right away. Excuse me. I've got allergies here in Arizona. I'm sorry. To just kind of learn to pluck with my fingers. Then I started to play with a pick because I could cut through the band, the guitars, and I couldn't afford big Ampeg SVTs and big huge amps, so I had to find a way to be heard, and I found the pick just created a tone. I could dig in and and I could cut through here. I'll move my camera down here a little bit. So. But you're right, what you're saying here with it. That bass line with Holy Wars, and there's not, when you're writing a line, you're going, okay, what do I play? Do you go, or do you pick up part of it? Or do you just go, you know what, I'm all in? You know what I mean? So, and I say that because there's certain lines like, and you're right, I'm picking up these thirds, right? And then single lines. And, there's certain lines, there's certain chords that work well with the bass. Double stops with like a 1-5. They're kind of a nice, especially if it's like the end of a statement. You know what I mean? They work well as just a big like exclamation point. And in the case of Holy Wars, it just made sense to pick those up because that's what the guitar's playing. You know what I mean? So you're picking, I picked those up along the way there. Symphony of Destruction, for instance, has a, when the song was being written, Dave played the guitar part. No. Right, that was the part that he wrote, and then the drums came in. So I kind of was like, well, let me learn the riff. Right? And I thought, well, let me fill the space. Let me do what a bass player would do. Let me fill the space, lock more with the drums, but yet picking up the note of the riff. So now I could have just played nothing there, just played right, and just picked up maybe half of the riff. But because it's an F to an E, it's a half step. Those always rub a little bit, you know what I mean? So it just seemed like, well, look, let me just grab the whole guitar riff and then fill in the notes in between so that I'm keeping something kind of glued between the guitar and the drums. And the part that I really enjoyed with that song was when we hit the chorus, because the guitar and the vocal is a descending line. Just like the Pied Piper led rats through the streets, right? And so then, right? There's that thing. So rather than just following the descending line, which I probably initially did, I thought, let me come up from the bottom and we'll meet in the middle. So bottom. Then we meet. That's the line we meet at. We meet on that. And then we go our separate ways. Guitars come down, bass goes up. Right? So it's kind of a cool coming from separate sides of the street, meeting in the middle. You know what I mean? And then we go our separate ways, we come back together again. So it was fun to create this, this counterpoint melody, the bass walking up, which in jazz band, the bass would play a walking bass line. So it was kind of fun to sort of incorporate some of that jazz stuff that's incorporated. And who else does a lot of that is Gene Simmons. The Gene Simmons bass lines are just brilliant. He creates inside of Kiss, those Kiss guitar parts are, Paul writes some very interesting voicings in his chords. And Gene creates ultimately the movement and the kind of the drive of the Kiss sound, right? Whether it's a fire. Right, he really creates the energy that moves it forward, and I think probably inadvertently, I have taken some of that philosophy into Megadeth. You know what I mean? Again, just driving. Really just keeping that thing moving again. So that it doesn't just stop and the bottom falls out, but really keeping the pulse and that's kind of the. That's the dance thing. It's as I understand what women like about me. I see that I picked up the bass so I could. It's easier to get a girl to dance when you're in the band than trying to ask a girl to dance. I found, right. So, but I'm told that and I shouldn't say. It's funny. I remember going to a wedding dance and there was some kind of hip hop groove going on, and for the first time it was like I was on the dance floor and I felt the DJ playing this hip hop stuff, and I'm like, okay, I totally get this now. I get what this is. Everybody's like, they want to move their bodies, and women like to move their bodies, when they're at concerts or dancing or out on the dance floor, they want to move, So I paid more attention to that as a bass player because the bass is the thing that creates this movement in the music, not just melodically, not just rhythmically, but tying it together. It's a big part of the role that I see the bass, fulfilling that role.
Absolutely. Well, that's what I love so much about your bass lines in particular, because they're not like atypical metal bass lines. There's so much more going on to them than but how did you find that space within? I mean, you're in a very loud band with two very loud guitarists. I mean, how do you find that space to be creative?
Yeah, it's interesting. It's a good question because in a two guitar band, those are the bookends, right? That's kind of the end zone, and you've got to play in between those end zones, right? In a one guitar band, or maybe one guitar and a keyboard or something, much more flexibility. And I learned that when I played a couple years with Ronnie Montrose, and those are great songs, especially there was the stuff from the first couple records that Sammy Hagar had sang on. And I was a fan of those records, so that I kind of knew the songs just intuitively anyway. Ronnie even said, he said, look, play the song as is, but when it comes time for the solo, I'll see you later. Like, I'm heading off, and I'm going. And he would go off. Sometimes for 5 minutes, he'd be over there just soloing, and me and at the time, Jimmy DeGrasso was the drummer, so we'd, kind of almost these kind of shuffle and boogie kind of. And just exploring, as long as you kind of stayed within the parameter of the riff and you didn't deviate too far away from kind of anchoring the audience into, yeah, that's right, we're playing Space Station number 5, or we're playing Rock Candy. Like, don't forget, that's the song we're in. That was kind of my role, was because there was no other melodic instrument. It was just me. It was me playing the notes, and then me and DeGrasso, swinging and grooving, so Ronnie could be out there just doing his thing. And Ronnie would go way out into other things that did not resemble the song at all. which is what he wanted to do. But it was my role then to sort of keep this pulse going that kept the audience engaged while Ronnie's over here tripping. And also remind the audience once in a while what song we're still in. You know, that, yeah, this is Rock Candy. We're in, right? You know, like keep everybody there. Like this is the song. So that when Ronnie came back, and he said, he goes, you'll know when I'm coming back because I'll start kind of indicating the melody again. And then we'd usually come back in and land in some big chorus, you know, kind of double chorus out, and then a big trash can ending kind of thing. And, you know, so my job was to just anchor it, explore, but keep the familiarity of the song for the audience. So it was a lot of fun because I didn't have to play within the end zones, you know, of the two guitar dynamic.
Right. And how did you develop your technique? Your exquisite
You know,
technique?
to me, technique develops purely out of necessity. You know, I see Billy Sheehan, you know, he created what he created because it's funny, like Talus. I remember seeing Talus open for Van Halen, I guess it was on 1980, Women and Children first tour. And I see Billy, and the drums are solid. The guitar player's much simpler. Billy's he's the show-off. He's the rock star of the band, right? I mean, he was the guy. So he, you know, could go places. It appeared to me that the guitar player wasn't going, the drummer wasn't going, and the singer wasn't going there. So he could go there, right? Like I said, technique, you know, originally I played with fingers, and then I needed to be heard, so I grabbed a pick. And then I tried to be a fingers guy again for a while, you know, in the early 80s. So, and I kept my finger chops up. But then when I got with Dave and we started doing the Megadeth stuff, originally I was playing with fingers, and I was just like, man, this stuff is... You know, you're playing these figures. You know, you can... You know, I know guys are like, well, play with your finger. And it's like... You know, who are you trying to impress? Because it doesn't sound good, you know? And especially when you get in the studio, it doesn't really lock with the click. So I grabbed the pick, and that's what really, you know, that's what really made the thing work, was playing with a pick. And it allowed me to pick up the riffs that Dave was writing, like, again, like the Holy Word. You know, pick those lines up and really play them precisely. With the plectrum, you know, and I could really mimic those riffs exactly, which is a big part of the Megadeth sound, is the precision in the sound. And again, the palm muting thing, you know, that's just part of what, when the riff is written with a palm mute in it, I find it's better to just mimic the guitar, you know, play what the guitar's playing right there. And even like, again, the Symphony of Destruction, palm mute. There's some opens, right? Open, palm mute, open, palm mute, right? So it's always this push and pull. There's always this thing to create. It's like when you speak, you don't just always talk monotone at the same time. You know what I mean? There's inflections, and so music is this, and how I play is the same thing. It's a conversation. You know, there's dynamics, you know, there's push, there's pull, there's listen, there's talk, you know, it's especially because when I'm palm muting, I'm listening to the singer, right? Dave's singing a vocal line. So shut up, get out of the way. Listen, you know what I mean? Like the riff is all of us, ga, 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 da, da, right? And then pull back, let the singer talk, you know, because that's what people want to hear. They don't want to hear the band screaming. So that's a big part of these things with dynamic is getting out of the way of whatever the spotlight moment is. The spotlight moment might be a solo, it might be the vocal, you know, but learn to get out of the way of those things so that you can let that instrument have its moment.
All right, cool, excellent. Well, I want to get into your, you know, you use Jackson basses a lot. Like, how did you get in with those guys? Were you always interested in Jackson? Or?
Yeah, you know, it's funny growing up. You know, again, kid of the 70s, it was mostly P basses, Les Pauls, you know, Stratocasters. Then in the 80s, things started to get pointy and sharp, you know, like BC Rich. Dean. I always loved the Dean guitars, like the Flying V body with the Flying V headstock. I thought was cool. So I got a BC Rich Mockingbird back in, I guess, about 1981. When I moved to LA, I met Dave. He had a BC Rich bitch. Kerry King from Slayer, who played with us on our first few shows, he was a BC Rich guy. So then, as it turns out, our drummer, Gar Samuelson, that would join the band a year later, he was a general manager at BC Rich, so that just made it easier to get fun guitars for video shoots and, kind of have an extensive collection of BC Rich stuff. And then, Jackson Charvel were around at the same time, and I saw Dokken open for Judas Priest in probably 86 or so, 86, early 87, and Jeff Pilson was playing a Jackson bass. And so I loved his tone, and so I went to Guitar Center. I found a Jackson bass. I plugged it into a Harkey amp and with a Gallion-Kruger head, and bang, next generation of my tone, So Dave and I went out to go see Grover Jackson, and Grover built him a King V based on Robin Crosby from Rat. He had the King V, but Dave had his made as a 24 fret. And then I had the concert bass made for me with the binding down the neck and that Quicksilver color, which is now my go-to color at Jackson. So I used Jacksons, all Megadeth. We used them through into the 90s, and I used some moduluses. I recorded with Spectors and Fenders and whatnot, Sadowskis and various things. But, when I, excuse me, we did the Rust in Peace 20th anniversary tour in 2010, and that's when I came back to Jackson. I said, look, I want this for the fans to look and sound exactly like 1990 all over again. So we went and we made it basically an updated version of this. This bass here is actually the new signature model Jackson, the 30th anniversary Rust in Peace. This is an exact replica of that very first Jackson 5-string that I invented with them, solely because I needed it to take on tour to play the song Hangar 18 on the Rust in Peace album. So we made this. I recorded the record, and then we made this bass, the original version of this. And I only had one. I mean, I took that thing around the world with me for years. And then, of course, since then we've, now since I'm back, we've done, this. We've got a 4-string version in silver. We've got, I think I've got 5 or 6 lines of signature stuff with them, and I consult with them. Yeah, I've got quite a few. The Kelly Bird we did. We have this one here. This one was pretty cool, which is kind of more of a traditional, Fender-ish, traditional thing, but with all the things you'd expect from a Jackson, the high-octane EMG pickups, the active electronics, but that, as a bolt-on has a more traditional, kind of Fender-ish tone. So we've, again, for me with Jackson, Jackson was kind of it was a great guitar company, and oh, by the way, we have a bass. We set out, when I came back in 2010, we set out to change that. It's like, let's make Jackson a real bass company. Let's make our bass line as competitive as the guitar line is. And so that's what that's what we've been doing over the last 10 years here, is really, rocking the bass line here.
Yeah, I mean, they're lovely. I like the look of the X Series for myself personally, because you can probably see behind me I'm a bit more traditional, but I like the whole. Well, they're Sandbergs, but they're, Fender-y. But I like the whole jazz pickup with split pickup combination. How did you?
I like that too. It's funny. I remember Greg Hall, I think is his name, is bass player of REO Speedwagon. I remember he had one of those when I was a kid, and he sang a great song. He wrote it and sang a song called "Back on the Road Again," back in the early days of REO Speedwagon, and he had one of those. I seem to remember Ted Nugent had a bass player at one point that he had a split pickup. So I liked it. It was cool. It was kind of the next level of like a Fender, thing. And so I always wanted one, and so when we got to the Jackson, this bass here is actually the replica of the very first one I had Grover make. And again, same thing, but what we did is we flipped, if you can see, we flipped the P. What I found was interesting is that when this is up here, there's about an 800 hertz mid-range, which is very Fenderish, and it's the Fender sound. But it really is not desired, at least by me, for heavy metal. And by flipping these coils here and putting this one in the back, you get rid of that. You get rid of that honk. You get a little bit more punch because it's closer to the bridge rather than the neck, and you get rid of that sort of honk of the Fender, which never worked for me inside of metal and thrash metal and stuff. So that by flipping that pickup, it gets down in the kick drum. It hits more behind the beater of the kick drum. It's more of a punch, and gets rid of that again, that kind of 800 hertz that is wobbly inside of a metal bass tone for me.
Yeah, I totally agree with you there. My bass is the same. The pickups the opposite of a Fender, and to me it just makes sense. I don't know why everyone doesn't do it, you know.
Yeah, I mean, again, Leo did it that way with the Fender so many years ago that no one complained. They just kind of assumed that was the way it was supposed to be. All right, that's what it is, you know. And that's, you know, again, I grew up in an age of, especially Eddie Van Halen. You know, Eddie would talk about how he'd chainsaw guitars and dip his pickups in wax. And I mean, we loved that. We're like, oh my God, this guy's so cool. This guy's willing to do anything. He'll just rip guitars apart and take necks off, and you know, and I did that too. I was doing the same thing. I was, you know, up late at night putting Kaler bridges on my basses, which were terrible and didn't work, you know, and because they don't do anything. You know, you take a bass string, it's already so low. As soon as you put the whammy down, the bass just goes boom. You know, there's no, you don't get the Jimi Hendrix effect on the bass, you know. And I'd be shaving my necks down to make them thinner and faster to play, and you know, so Eddie was our hero, man. And same with Jocko, you know, Jocko ripping the frets out, and you know, I did that. I ripped frets out of basses, and you know, these guys were my heroes, man, just to do that. So you know, again, you know, and then once you get in a group and you develop a sound, and you know, now all of a sudden you start looking for instruments that will accommodate what you're creating, rather than you creating what your instrument tells you is what it should be. And you know, like Metallica were one of the first bands. They got on board with the Mesa Boogie amps, and that changed their sound. They had a whole very different guitar tone than everybody else. And then, you know, I saw Korn when we took them out. They had the Ibanez through the Mesa. I mean, that band literally changed the NAMM floor. You know, all of a sudden, everybody was all about the boogie. Everybody's all about, you know, the Mesa sound. They want the Ibanez sound. And as much as Satriani and Vai had their guitars, you know, once Korn came out doing that thing, you know, and all of a sudden Linkin Park. I mean, every band that followed them for the next, you know, 20 years had that, you know, Disturbed, Godsmack. Everybody had the triple rectifier Mesa thing going on, and I mean, it, you know, all it takes is one band, you know, to just change everything. You know, Hendrix flipping a right-handed guitar left-handed. Now all of a sudden, everybody wants to do that. You know, and it's one influential artist can change the entire arc of the musical instrument manufacturing world.
Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah, to have that much power.
Yeah. I mean, it's just that, you know, again, we call them players of influence, you know what I mean? And I think, you know, look, Megadeth was like that, certainly with Jackson. You know, I had the concert bass. Dave had the 24-fret V. Marty Friedman started playing the Kelly. The Kelly was kind of a lost guitar, you know, and Marty Friedman made it famous, you know, because of his playing, you know, big Megadeth got, you know, so it's cool when we can. And it's kind of the same thing with Harkey, you know, it's funny, me and Victor Wooten have pretty much the same tone curve. We've got kind of the California smile in our tone curve. Yet we played totally different. We played two different genres of music. But it's funny how our Harkey sound is a very, it's kind of what you would expect us to be playing through. You know, it's become such a signature part of our sound. And it's because that amp allows us to go where our ear hears our parts played. You know what I mean? It's a piece of gear that supports what we do rather than us having to change how we play in order to accommodate our gear, you know. I grew up wanting to be a P bass into an SVT guy because that's what Aerosmith and all my heroes played, you know. But it never worked for me. It was never the right sound. I'd pick it up and go, that doesn't work. It's not my sound. So I ended up, again, altering. Instead of playing a Fender, I went for a Jackson, you know. Instead of having an SVT, I went for a Harkey, you know. So I've got my trippy my little nuances of stuff because that's what gives me, you know, power to my voice.
That's it. Like, I mean, it's. I just want to get back to technique stuff. Like when you're playing 5-string as well with a plectrum. I mean, there's so many issues with muting and all that. Like, how do you get around that?
Well, that was why when we invented this bass, we kept the string spacing very narrow. You know, this was 1990 when we created this, and at the time there was the, you know, Music Man had one. There were a lot of, God, what was the instrument? Gibson absorbed the company. He was a smaller guy making basses over in Hollywood. But most of these things were made for these jazz and R&B guys, and they were very wide necks. And I'm like, man, I can't do that. Because, again, I'm literally coming from this size. If you compare these two necks, because these are literally the two instruments right here from which these came. So look at how the 5 is just slightly wider than the 4, and that's what I wanted, you know. And then let's just cram the 5th string on there, you know, because I'm just a beginner 5-string, you know, literally run tour doing Rest in Peace, and I'm getting used to playing the 5. And I think one of the main things is, again, back then there weren't that many bridges, there weren't very many things to accommodate that, so we kind of had to go with the string spacing that we found. You know, this is a Jackson bridge now. We make our own, but at the time it was like, I think a Goto had a bridge that would accommodate that. And you know, it's one of the things why, you know, it's funny, I bought a Rickenbacker. I hadn't had one in many years. I finally got one, and then I realized why the Rickenbacker doesn't work for me is because it doesn't have a string that comes over a saddle. It goes through a channel, and you can't palm mute it, right? So if I ever play a Rickenbacker, it'll be for some kind of like punk rock session or something where there's no palm muting, because, you know, I've had guys give me bridges and go, man, use my bridge. And dude, I'd love to use your bridge, but it's got a channel instead of a saddle, and I need the saddle so I can palm mute with it, you know. So, you know, all these things are just part of, you know, like I said, this 5-string, what I realize is, you know, when you come down across the strings, you know, you have to lighten up your attack on that 5th string, otherwise it gets all farty and gnarly sounding. So, you know, up here these strings are really tight. You know, and I'm overdoing it for the purpose of demonstration here, but you know, you can tell you have to, you know. So, and this bass has an incredible tension. I mean, they really did a good job on this bass. We make these over at in Indonesia at the PT Court factory, and they're great. I mean, they're just straight out of the box. They're awesome. So, because that's a big part of it, is the tension, is making sure the tension is right on that 5th string. This one's a lot better than the original one we built in 1990. Believe me. You know, that was a demo. And that was the only one I had, and the tour was starting, so I had to take it with me and make it work. You know, then over the years, I just got used to playing and writing more songs with 5 strings, so I just started playing the 5. That just kind of became my instrument I keep with me all night.
Why did you switch to 5?
Well, for Hangar 18. that was really when we did Hangar 18, because the song, it's in D, right? It's got this kind of D major, right? And I didn't want to play it up here. I wanted it to be down here. I wanted it to be low, right? And originally, I just took the low B string. Now I'm tuned to, you know, in a standard, it's tuned in 4ths, you know. But originally, I had it, this B string was just in D, so I could ride open, right? So that note right there was tuned to that, right? Right? And I only needed it for that one song. And then I would just keep it on, because we'd put songs so close together in the set, I would, well, let me just keep it for the next 3 songs. So eventually I got used to playing a 5-string bass throughout the show. And then we wrote Countdown to Extinction. I started to incorporate the 5-string more. We had a song called Go to Hell that we wrote for Bill and Ted soundtrack, and that was... So now I'm hitting that E flat. So now, you know, again, got to have a 5-string. And I didn't want to do the hip shot drop tuning thing. That wasn't for me. Because it's funny, I'm kind of a square in this, you know, because I grew up playing the organ, proper training, manuscripts, you know, everything's where it is. Then I played the sax, and I learned to play the bass in standard A440 tuning. according to the the Mel Bay book that I learned from, and my experiences from orchestra band. I the whole drop tuning and just putting your instrument in whack tunings, it just drives me crazy, because I always need to know where's like true north here, where's center. So I would rather, even if guitar players are in funky drop whack tunings, I'd rather keep my bass in a standard tuning and musically learn what they're playing and play it musically correct on my bass. So I'm kind of a nerd like that, because that's my center. I don't like to just dumb down and just, and guitar players can do that. They can drop and get all weird. I do it myself. I got guitars where I drop them and they're in all kinds of whack tunings. And as long as I can write the part and create the music, I don't really care anything about the musicality of it. I'm more about just get the sound. But when it comes to then playing bass to it, I find it's just easier for me, song after song, night after night, to keep some center to it, and that's just usually is with kind of a standard tuning.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, David. So hopefully we'll see you at the end of the year, and maybe next year over here, I hope, with Bass Chronicles.
Yeah. I look, let's hope so. I'm vaccinated, so I'm ready to go. I've got my little vaccine passport. I'm ready. I'm ready to go. So hopefully we'll see you soon.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, David.
You're welcome, Ellen. See ya. Bye.